In the year 83 AD, nearly 2,000 years ago, an epic battle took place here between the disciplined might of the Roman legions and the fiercely independent warriors of Caledonia, where men on both sides fought for honour, freedom and the fate of entire cultures. It had been 4 decades since the Romans first set foot on the island of Britannia. Over these decades, the invaders had pushed relentlessly into the lands of the native peoples. Now, at the very edge of the known Roman world, one last free bastion prepared to either stand firm or fall before the advancing might of Rome. So let me tell you the story of what happened here. On the day of the battle, a stirring call to arms rang out from the Caledonian leader, Calgacus, whose very name meant swordsman. He had a reputation forged on the anvil of countless skirmishes and battles. Calgacus then rallied his warriors by denouncing the Romans as nothing less than thieves and butchers. His words were more than a cry of defiance. They were a declaration of identity for a people who had long lived in the wild, untamed fringes of ancient Scotland, and to this point out of reach of the Roman Empire. Meanwhile, the Roman forces under the command of Agricola, a veteran Roman general, prepared themselves for the confrontation that would decide the fate of northern Britannia. Although the exact battle site of Mons Graupius cannot be verified with complete certainty, the available evidence strongly suggests that here at Bennachie in Aberdeenshire is the most probable location. By the early decades of the 1st century, the occupation of Britannia was no longer an abstract idea. It was a reality, albeit a contested one. For many in Rome, Britannia had always been shrouded in mystery. Caesar's expeditions in 55 and 54 BC had first dispelled doubts about the island's existence. Although his campaigns were unable to fully subjugate the native tribes, they had succeeded in drawing a bright, if unwelcome, spotlight on a land that had until then remained on the periphery of Roman ambition. Roman interest in Britannia was further piqued during the reign of Emperor Claudius. In a bid to secure the empire's northern frontier, Claudius dispatched Aulus Plautius to invade and establish Roman control over parts of the island. Progress was steady, though incomplete. In southern England, where native tribes were already linked to the mainland through trade and cultural ties, Romanization took root swiftly. Towns, roads, and the infrastructures of Roman rule began to reshape the landscape and the lives of its inhabitants. However, not all was smooth in Britannia. While the southern tribes were more agreeable to Roman influence, much of northern England and Wales remained untamed. The far northern peoples, later to be known as the Caledonians, us Scots, were proud, independent, and determined to remain free from the yoke of imperial Roman domination. Resistance was not only expected, it was inevitable. After decades of initial conquest, the Roman hold on Britannia was gradually consolidating. Commanders like Quintus Petilius Cerialis had quelled rebellions among the Brigantians and other tribes, while others like Frontinius had directed their energies against unruly Silures and Ordovices in Wales. In this series of hard-won victories and constant skirmishes, a new leader emerged, Gnaeus Julius Agricola. Agricola was a seasoned commander with a reputation hardened by years of campaigning. He had arrived in Britannia in the late summer of 77 AD. He had served in various capacities before his appointment as governor and was well known to the Senate and indeed to future historians through the accounts of Tacitus, his own son-in-law. Agricola inherited a province where Roman legions had been established, but where further expansion and pacification were still very much on the agenda. The north, with its dense forests, rugged highlands and fiercely independent tribes posed a particularly stubborn challenge. Agricola's vision was clear: to extend Roman dominion to the very ends of this island. Yet his task was not merely one of military conquest, it was also a battle of ideologies. On one side stood the orderly, disciplined forces of Rome, representing law, structure, and imperial destiny. On the other hand, the Caledonians embodied the untamed spirit of freedom, a people who had long relied on the natural barriers of their remote lands to preserve their independence. As alliances shifted and local rivalries intensified among the native tribes, the prospect of a unified Caledonian response under a charismatic leader like Calgacus became increasingly likely. Both sides, the Romans and the Caledonians, were preparing for a decisive clash that would determine whether the edge of the world would remain a haven for free peoples or fall under the shadow of imperial conquest. In the years leading up to the fateful engagement at Mons Graupius, the province of Britannia was a landscape in constant flux. Agricola, known for his unyielding discipline and personal involvement in the campaign, had spent the previous seasons consolidating Roman control. His initial operations included decisive actions against rebellious tribes in Wales, who were called the Ordovices, and even a campaign on the island of Anglesey, a land previously scarred by the famous assault of Boudicca's vanquisher, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus. Agricola's military strength was characterised by both persistence and innovation. When Agricola's cavalry regiment came under attack by the Ordovices, he responded by mobilising the fastest horse and infantry units to flush the enemy out from their hilltop refuges. In one instance, when specialised Batavian troops were required to overcome the treacherous waterways around Anglesey, Agricola did not hesitate to order these men, who were renowned for their ability to swim with weapons and even horses, to cross and engage the enemy directly. Such bold and at times unconventional measures not only reinforced Roman strength, but also sent a clear message. The Romans were prepared to adapt to any terrain or tactical challenge. Meanwhile, in the northern fringes, native resistance was growing bolder. As Roman legions pushed further into what we now know as modern Moray and Aberdeenshire, the indigenous peoples who were long accustomed to life on the remote fringes of the Roman Empire found themselves cornered. For these tribes there was no safe haven. The sea itself was seen as an extension of the Roman threat, with constant sightings of Roman warships along the coast. This desperate situation helped catalyse the assembly of a formidable confederation of Caledonian warriors under the leadership of a man called Calgacus. Calgacus emerged as the charismatic figure capable of uniting the northern tribes. Tacitus's account, though it's filtered through a Roman perspective, actually paints Calgacus as extraordinary among his peers, brave, noble, and eloquent. In one of the most stirring moments of the pre-battle rhetoric, Calgacus addressed his men with a speech that, whether entirely factual or partly rhetorical, encapsulated the Caledonian ethos. He declared, "There are no lands behind us, and even the sea is menaced by the Roman fleet. We, the choice flower of Britannia, have been treasured in her most secret places. Out of sight, shores, even our eyes are free from the defilement of tyranny." In these words, the sense of isolation and impending doom was palpable. For the Caledonians, there was no possibility of retreat, only a fight for survival. His message was one of defiant independence. His people, long shielded by the remoteness of their lands, were now forced to confront the overwhelming force of Rome. This impassioned declaration was not merely a rallying cry, it was an articulation of an identity that was forged in centuries of resistance and isolation. It resonated with the assembled warriors, many of whom had grown up with the belief that their remote homelands could protect them from the encroachments of a foreign power. Yet, As the boundaries of Britannia were pushed ever outward, the once impenetrable shield of distance slowly began to crumble. The battle that loomed on the horizon was not just a military engagement, it was a struggle for the very soul of a people determined to remain free. In parallel, Agricola and his Roman commanders were preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Despite the lateness of the campaigning season, by September the window for Roman military operations was rapidly closing. Agricola resolved to act. His orders were firm and his determination was unyielding. The enemy would be met head-on, whether in the hills or in the open plain. As the Roman forces consolidated and reorganised, the stage was set for one of the most critical battles in Britannia's history. On the day of the confrontation, both sides assumed positions on a terrain that would soon be etched into the annals of history. The chosen battlefield was distinctive high ground near a flat expanse. A probable contender for this location is Bennachie, as it was noted as being an easily identifiable rallying point for the Caledonian tribes to muster to, which Bennachie certainly was. Bennachie has an arrowhead-like hilltop that can be seen for miles and miles on end and is very unique compared to any other mountains in Aberdeenshire. The area was also ideal for the use of chariots, as it was said to be of a flat plane, a weapon that Calgacus and his fellow chieftains hoped would strike a path through the disciplined Roman ranks. For the Romans, the deployment was methodical and precise. Agricola had divided his forces into 3 distinct groups to safeguard against any flanking manoeuvres by the enemy. At the heart of the formation stood approximately 8,000 Roman auxiliary infantry in the front column, supported by 5,000 cavalry deployed along the wings. Though the exact numbers of Agricola's legionary infantry remain uncertain, these were his most experienced and elite soldiers who were held back in the second column in reserve. They were believed to be around 8,000 men, bringing the overall Roman force to a mighty 20,000 strong. Before the clash, Agricola addressed his assembled soldiers, a speech that, despite the logistical challenges of trying to reach every ear on such a vast field, he apparently managed to inspire confidence and readiness. It is now the 7th year, fellow soldiers, that under the auspices of the Roman Empire, through bravery and loyal service, you have been conquering Britain. We have surpassed the limits reached by earlier campaigns and previous armies. His words, whether fully heard or not, ignited a fervour among his troops, who promptly seized their arms and assumed their positions with apparent renowned vigour. On the opposing side, the Caledonians, who were estimated to be around 30,000 strong, were equally determined. Their formation was a mixture of tightly grouped infantry and a host of chariots, manned by noble but fierce charioteers. These warriors, many of whom fought on foot with long swords and crude shields, also prepared to exploit the mobility and shock power of their chariots. As the enemy approached, the shouts, the blast of horns, and the combination of war cries created an atmosphere charged with both terror and exhilaration. Even days before the main engagement, the tension was starting to build. One notable incident occurred when a contingent of Caledonian warriors, seizing upon the opportunity presented by the vulnerability of a legion, launched a night attack against the 9th Legion's camp. The legion, already under strength, was caught off guard essentially, with many soldiers sleeping and then found themselves in imminent peril. However, thanks to the diligent work of Agricola's scouts, the movement was detected swiftly. Roman horses and infantry units moved fast and were well coordinated and rushed to the camp's rear, catching the enemy by surprise. Despite the intense crush of bodies at the camp's gateway, most of the Caledonian attackers were forced to retreat into the darkness, their earlier aggression failing to deliver a decisive blow. This minor engagement, though brief, set the tone for the day's unfolding battle. It was a stark reminder that both sides were capable of bold manoeuvres, and that Agricola's men were not only disciplined, but also acutely aware of every shift in enemy activity. As the morning light revealed the full extent of the battlefield, the two armies clashed with violence and intensity, befitting their contrasting natures. The Roman auxiliaries, familiar with fighting in a looser formation, were deployed at the forefront. Their tactical flexibility was key to countering the unpredictable movement of the Caledonian chariots. These chariots, driven by their elite charioteers, darted across the field in parallel runs, each attempt aimed at breaching the Roman lines with the lethal scythe-like blades attached to their wheels. Agricola, ever the tactician, anticipated the potential threat of a flanking manoeuvre. With his infantry forward, he ordered them to widen their formation. This not only provided room to channel the chariots into confined corridors where they could be isolated and neutralised, but also allowed for rapid adjustments should the enemy try to envelop the Roman forces. In the rear, a group of veteran legionaries, hard-bitten and battle-tested, waited in reserve, ready to plug any gaps or respond to emerging threats. The initial exchanges were brutal. The Caledonians, with their long swords, suited for prolonged close-quarters combat, found themselves at a disadvantage against the shorter, more efficient gladius blades of the Batavian and Tungrian Roman cohorts, troops that formed a significant part of the auxiliary ranks. These cohorts were renowned for their ferocity and precision, stabbed and slashed their way through the enemy lines. Their combat style was augmented by the effective use of shields. The brass-edged and iron-bossed shields of Agricola's men smashed into the Caledonian warriors, inflicting heavy casualties. As the battle raged, the role of the cavalry became increasingly decisive. The enemy mounted forces, however, proved to be less disciplined and poorly equipped compared to their Roman counterparts. Concerned that his smaller cavalry might be enveloped by the Caledonians' own mounted warriors, Agricola reinforced his positions by releasing an additional 3,000 cavalry from the reserve. This fresh contingent charged ferociously into the enemy flanks, scattering the opposing horsemen in what proved to be a one-sided engagement. Despite the auxiliary infantry's earlier success in halting the Caledonian chariots and infantry, the battle was far from over. As the engagement progressed, waves of Caledonian warriors streamed down the slopes of the high ground to join the fray. Their numbers, fueled by desperation and the conviction of defending their freedom, swelled the ranks of the Romans. Though the Romans initially in control found themselves having to repel a renewed and relentless assault. Agricola, fully aware of the danger of being outflanked, mounted his steed and led his men in a vigorous counterattack. In a dramatic moment, he joined the final hunt for the fugitives as hundreds of Caledonian warriors began to retreat into the woodland areas in the slopes of the hill. The chaos of the retreat and the ensuing pursuit left many of the enemy scattered in their lines, dissolving in the face of the disciplined Roman advance. Yet not all would fall in open combat. Some of the Caledonian fighters, ever resourceful, regrouped in thick cover of the trees. In these wooded pockets, a counterattack was mounted on a group of Roman pursuers, forcing Agricola to order a light-armed cohorts to form rings, which were mobile units that could effectively chase down the enemy, while mounted cavalry struck at those emerging from sparser cover. Throughout the battle, the clash of arms, the roar of chariots, and the thundering charge of cavalry combined to create a scene of overwhelming violence. The Caledonian warbands, though valiant and determined, began to completely scatter. They were gradually overpowered by the superior organisation, tactical flexibility, and relentless discipline of Agricola's forces. The battle itself became a crucible, testing the mettle of both the Roman soldiers and the native warriors, who saw in this engagement their last chance to remain free. The Romans then harried the retreating Caledonian forces through the woodland terrain. Losses are estimated to be at 10,000 dead for the Caledonians, with it's noted to be only 360 dead among the Romans. The fate of the Caledonian leader Calgacus is unknown, though assuming Calgacus was one of the bold charioteer chieftains who saw first combat, it is likely he fell relatively earlier in the battle. In the days following the confrontation at Mons Graupius, the Roman camp remained a hive of activity. Agricola's forces had achieved an overwhelming victory, a triumph not only measured in the number of enemy casualties, but in the symbolic defeat of a people who had long clung to the notion of freedom on the far edge of the world. The Romans celebrated their success with triumphant decorations and a statue commemorating the campaign. Yet, even in victory, there lingered a sombre reminder. Many of the native warriors had escaped into the wilds, and the freedom for which they had fought would continue to burn in the hearts of all the survivors that had managed to escape this battle. The immediate tactical gains were significant. Agricola's decisive victory temporarily secured Roman control over northern Britannia, and the battle had proven that the mighty Roman legions could overcome even the most determined of tribal coalitions. The carefully orchestrated deployment, the use of auxiliaries in flexible formations, the effective countering of enemy chariots, and the timely intervention of reserve cavalry demonstrated the effectiveness of Roman military doctrine. Agricola's personal leadership in joining the fray and chasing down fleeing enemy combatants further bolstered the morale of his troops and cemented his reputation as a leader committed to the subjugation of Britannia. However, the triumph at Mons Graupius, for all its immediate glory, did not lead to a permanent occupation of the northernmost lands of Britannia. Within a decade of the battle, the Caledonians had regrouped and had drawn strength from their continued resistance. They once again emerged as a formidable force in Caledonia. The Roman priorities gradually shifted to other parts of the empire, with troops being removed from Britannia to be sent to other regions. The challenge of maintaining control over the rugged and ever-changing frontier eventually led to a strategic withdrawal. By 90 AD, the Caledonians had regained much of their independence. The nature of Roman rule in Britannia changed, with the focus shifting from full-scale conquest to a more measured approach. The frontier was eventually drawn along the line marked by Hadrian's Wall, and later the Antonine Wall, which would serve as the northern boundary for Romans in Britain. The Battle of Mons Graupius remains one of the most debated and analysed engagements of ancient military history. Roman sources, most notably Tacitus, offers a vivid, if sometimes selective, portrayal of the events. Through his writings, we glimpse into the valour of both the disciplined Roman soldiers and the fiercely independent Caledonians. The detailed accounts of strategic deployments and the bloody aftermath on the slopes of a contested high ground all contribute to a complex picture of a battle that was as much about ideology as it was about military might. For Agricola, the battle was the culmination of years of campaigning, a demonstration of his resolve to extend Roman dominion to the very edges of the known world. For the Caledonians, it was a desperate stand against the inexorable tide of an empire whose methods and motivations were seen as both alien and destructive. In both cases, the clash at Mons Graupius became a microcosm of a larger struggle, a struggle between order and chaos, civilization and wilderness, empire and independence. If you've stayed this long, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to do the usual, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and importantly, please leave a comment as a sacrifice to the algorithm. Also, if you'd like to support me on this journey, please consider supporting me on Patreon. By becoming a Patreon member, you'll get first and early access to all my new videos, and I'll give a shout out at the end of each video for all the new members, and a credit for all existing members. It's just a great way to support me, and it helps me with costs involved in travelling around Scotland to these different locations. There's a link to my Patreon in the comment section and also on my front of my YouTube page bio. Just click the link and then click become a member. It would go a long way in helping me to continue making these videos. But the main thing is, folks, I just want you to watch and enjoy these videos. So if you don't want to be a Patreon member, that's completely fine. You can just watch and enjoy the videos, because that's the most important thing. Anyway, folks, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.